Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper. Thank you for joining us for this part 3 of our 3-part series with Nathaniel Leeds. Why did you ultimately decide to become a lawyer?
Well, it's a kind of interesting story, and it goes back to cancer, which is I had, through school, always really struggled with reading and writing. I'm a very slow reader. I'm a very imprecise writer. I have pretty good verbal skills, but I don't think I received an A or even a B plus on a written project until I was in law school. And I had been in special education all through high school. And there was always a weird kid. People always recognized that I was smart, encouraged me to go far and said, you've got the brains to do something with yourself. But as far as succeeding in those areas, I couldn't. So you can imagine somebody with reading and writing skills, or who challenges with reading and writing, not necessarily drawn to the law. But then I had the gift of cancer. And so, we talked about, I got my diagnosis and it was about 6 weeks. Well, those were a very important 6 weeks of my life. Between the time when I got my diagnosis and I knew that I was going to beat the cancer and they'd finally staged me.
And when you say they were important 6 weeks, can you elaborate on that?
Well, it was the greatest gift a person could get, which is if at 25 you're told you might die, the next thing you say is, well, if I don't, what should I do with the gift that I might be receiving, right? You're kind of planning on spending that money of good health before you've received it. And you say, okay, well, what am I no longer scared of? I had some exposure to lawyers prior to my cancer diagnosis. Right out of, I had been in a graduate program at UCLA. I dropped out and I founded a computational linguistics software company, raised some money, recruited some very bright people who built a very early computer system to find the most representative sentence in blocks of text. What is the topic sentence? Basically pulling out topic sentences. And figuring out how interrelated various topic sentences were. It was a kind of early AI type thing.
I just want to point out here that we have been riding and walking and talking for hours per week for years, and I don't know this.
Well, good. I'd like to forget it. But I was really arrogant. I was 23, and I had recruited some signals processing people from JPL and Caltech, and somehow in the hothouse days of the pre-dot-com collapse, they all decided they were going to follow a 23-year-old who was confident enough to claim that we'd be a company. And I raised a whole mess of money and hired them up, and we started building some stuff. In that process, I had come and interacted with a lot of lawyers. And I kept thinking, boy, I really like what these guys are doing. They had my short attention span. And, they had been people who, for 6 months, they'd been working on a case involving oil, and then they had learned about this thing, and they were entrepreneurial, and seemed to mostly be, they were all small firm type people. And I thought, boy, does that look cool. But, somebody who can't read and write very well, I wasn't exactly going to march off the law school until I got my cancer diagnosis. And when I got my cancer diagnosis, the first thing I did was I said, well, what am I not, I've been scared of things. What would I like to do if I beat this? And I said, well, stop being scared of a profession that requires good reading and writing skills. You can be a lawyer. You might not go to the best law school, but, might not excel at it, but there's a lot of it that looks kind of good for me. And so I got my cancer diagnosis. I signed up for the next LSAT that was being given. The LSATs were being given on Saturdays back then. I'm not sure if they still are. I was receiving my chemotherapy on Thursdays. And if anybody knows how chemo works, generally the first day after, it's not so bad. And then all the poisons start getting into your body. And for me, the day when I was weakest was Saturdays. Well, I hadn't known that when I signed up for the LSAT. And so I showed up to take the LSAT. All my hair had fallen out. And I was weak and feeling extremely sick. I'd had got my infusion the Thursday prior. And I just remember, I said, okay, well, what room am I in? And they said, well, you're downstairs. And I looked at the stairs and I thought, I don't think I have the physical strength right now to get down those stairs. And I said, well, can I move to a different room? I don't really feel comfortable about this. I'm not feeling very strong. And I said, no, that's the room you're assigned to. So I waited for a big crowd of people to start going down the stairs and went after them on the idea that if I fell, I'd just fall into these people. I made it down, now I'm a lawyer, not dead in an LSAT room. So that's how I ended up in law. So, when we were talking earlier about that idea of, recognizing that you might not be the best at something, I think there's a youthful desire to be the best at everything. I think that where we have the most growth is realizing what we're not good at, then figuring out ways of working with that. Sometimes your weaknesses can be your greatest strength. For me, I think that not being particularly good at reading and writing, that's one of the reasons I wasn't a great associate. If you're hiring associates so they can precisely answer discovery and write precise memos, I just was not going to excel at that. But, the fearlessness that comes from being somebody who's not good at something, is a fearlessness which I think will carry you a long way. However you're going to do it, if you can go into a world that's uncomfortable for you, you will figure out ways of making it comfortable and find a space for yourself in it.
You talk about not being the associate who might be the best reader-writer for answering discovery. You show up, I think, shortly before Guy Caladine's going out to trial on a major case and end up being his second there in a very high-stakes case. Can you articulate I'm going to call it a lack of fear component, you may use a different term for it, that allowed you to really excel and kind of hit your sweet spot in terms of moving forward?
Well, I don't, you have to ask Guy Caladine how I ended up being that person. I think that may come from the criminal experience and that kind of big picture perspective. I mean, we as attorneys have to both look at things in great detail, and there are going to be people who excel at the great detail part of our work, and people who have to look at things in big picture and excel at that. I mean, I think that my practice, fortunately, I kind of I straddle both, and not always effectively, frankly. I would say my law partner is one of the most intuitive, big picture people I've ever met, and me and him, we don't work individual cases; we work every case together. I do still love the details of the mathy, sciencey side of things, sometimes to my own detriment. I'm going to be the person who at middle of the night is reading computer audit logs and seeing if I can tease something out. He's going to be the guy who's going to think of the big picture stuff. But I had that big picture training as a DA. I think some of that allowed me to be useful for Guy in his trial.
Why would a computer audit log be significant in a medical malpractice case?
People's memories fade. Computers' memories don't. I know where everybody was. I know who touched the patient. I know what they were responsible for by where they touched the computer audit log.
And I think that it might be helpful for people who don't have the detail in electronic medical records and the data contained within them for you to perhaps unpack that a little bit. I think it's helpful both for people who might want to be medical malpractice practitioners and for those of us who are dealing with medical records in terms of the history and sequencing.
Generally, every electronic medical record by statute has to record every time somebody was in that record. The privacy rules, the HIPAA compliance, that's part of it, is that every touch of the medical record gets recorded.
Is somebody going to see that in the PDF records that they're getting day to day, or they're going to need to request something special in terms of metadata to go next level to obtain that?
They need to request it, and often defense counsel doesn't know everything that's available. So it's a longer topic, but every computer system will have this audit log. You need to request it. You need to request it in a format that you can use, and you need to push back when they give you the audit log in a format that doesn't make sense.
And when you say you can use, I'm presuming that you have special skills in terms of using technology and being able to map this? Is it going into Excel? Is it going into some sort of a proprietary database? How are you parsing this, or how would you recommend somebody without your skills to parse it as far as an expert's concerned?
Well, I mean, the easiest thing is if you can just get them to give it to you in chronological order. Sometimes they won't even do that for you, and you have to push back and get in chronological order. If you have in chronological order, even if it's just on paper, you can look at the times of interest and see who is touching the file at the time of interest. For us, I do a lot of processing through Excel. All of my narrative, all of my crons go into Excel, and so generally we'll be putting audit logs into Excel and then using the filtering and sorting things that are available in Excel to start teasing out what we want. So, if I'm going into a deposition with a target defendant or any defendant, and I'm not sure exactly all of their involvement with the patient, then I'll print out the audit log. Sometimes they will not have written a note, especially in an academic facility where, interns or residents are the people who are actually writing notes. You might not have any evidence that the attending, who's a professor, was seeing this patient at all. Everybody will say, well, I consulted with him. It's like, when did you consult? For how long? Well, you look at the audit log and you'll actually see when was that professor logging in and looking at records, or was he not? And so it gives you this second layer of information that is in addition to what you get in the PDF that they print out for you. I'd say that one of the challenges with audit logs is that you need to understand kind of how these computer systems are organized at various hospitals. Historically, what happened was different parts of the medical operation became electronic at different times. And so that big medical record that we see is often riding on top of other computer systems. So there will be a separate computer system for the radiology group that's usually referred to as a PACS. There'll be a separate computer system for the pathology group. So you'll get the audit log at that top level for the EMR, the electronic medical record, but it won't tell you the information about who was just interacting in one of these little subsystems. Sometimes you have a spidey sense for it. Your PMK depots are a great way of figuring this stuff out.
What questions do you ask in the PMK depots to start teasing out whether there are subsystems? And I'll give you background. I know enough from sitting around in cancer treatment to have been exposed to Epic, which is a very common database that UCSF, Stanford uses. Is that what you're talking about in terms of like a parent software that then has subparts that have been sucked into it?
That's right.
Okay.
And the implementation of Epic at different facilities will be different. So Epic is starting to become the category killer, right? They're starting to marry all these things together. Some Epic salesperson marches down to your local hospital and says, hey, we want to put you on Epic, right? That local hospital will say, great, we already have a radiology technology suite that we're using. We already have a pathology technology suite we're using. We already have a suite which is running our medication and billing. They're made by different companies. And Epic will say, fine, I'll build on top of that, and then most of that will then project through to Epic. It doesn't always completely project through. So then you have to go into those subsystems. And as far as what questions to ask in the PMK, it's always the same answer. Ask dumb ones and let them correct you.
And are you noticing a PMK for computer operations, or is this someone else?
Yeah, I would be noticing. I'm trying to think of the last time I sent out a notice like this. There's a statute which says that they're required to keep all these records. I think the last time I did it is I just said, PMK with person most knowledgeable about hospital compliance with this statute that requires you to keep these records and where those records are.
And if somebody wanted an exemplar of this, would this be something you'd be willing to share if they reached out to you?
I'd be willing to share if I can find it.
Okay.
At this point in my career and the relationships I have with opposing counsel, I get to do a lot of this stuff without actually formal discovery, because I just call them up and I say, this is what I need. Do you need me to go to a PMK? And they say, no, I'd rather not. And, stuff will flow towards me.
I'm finding this piece interesting because I do think it maps out to other organizational across the board in terms of the litigation that we do. And by other organizational, I'm interested in phones because nowadays there's lots of texting back and forth between different departments, and there can either be individual phones or department phones. Do those feed into the EMR in a way that you can build your timeline, or are those different things that you need to go after in your search tools, discovery tools?
Yeah, those are other things that you need to go after, because often what's happening is people are using personal phones that are then linking in. At least in the hospital context, the time when the hospital was giving people pagers and cell phones is gone. And increasingly, we had a very tragic case where it was at an academic facility, and all the younger doctors, pretty much any doctor under 35 was communicating by text.
A text that was through, say, an Epic app, or just
personal text, direct text. And that's how they communicate, because that's how they communicate all the time. Everybody under 35, that's what you do. And, of course, their coworkers, the people who they're in medical school with or in their residencies with, they're texting about beer, and they're then going to text about patients. It's the exact same conversation. None of that was being captured in the EMR. And what that meant was that the professors, who were not of the texting generation, had no idea what the younglings were doing. And so they're making decisions at this text level. I would say formal discovery is a very bad way of getting that information.
How did you get it?
Just when somebody's in a depot, ask them if they have the same phone and ask them to look at it and tell you if they have any text messages from the time period. The second they say yes, you get ready with your motion compel and say, okay, counsel, you have not diligently attempted to get all the communication. Here was my standard request for documents which reflect all communication concerning my client during the period of care. We've just gone into a deposition, and I now have communication you haven't given me before. Are we going to keep having this conversation? Are we going to start talking about sanctions? What are we doing? Or are you going to go out and get that information for me?
Early in our conversation, you talked about developing collegial communications with opposing counsel. And my guess is, while there are some opposing counsel who are playing games, there are other opposing counsel who are just simply lazy or uninformed. How do you maintain that cordiality while being aggressive in containing your discovery?
Who knows? Sometimes ineffectively. I would say that, generally people want to not have egg on their face, right? And so if you've asked for something in discovery and suddenly they've got egg on their face, I always think about it the same way, which is I want my opposing counsel to be the hero. I never want my opposing counsel to be ashamed or embarrassed. And generally, if you're giving them the choice between embarrassment, we're going to have to do some law and motion practice on this, you're going to have to talk to your client about it, or them just quietly being the hero and getting it, if you give them the opportunity to be the hero, they're going to be the hero. The case we were talking about where I got that, we did not have to do any motion work at all. Once that happened, I just said, I'm sorry you missed it before, but we really are going to need this stuff. Let's not make an issue of it. Can you go and just double check? And then let them be the hero. And they were. They went and very diligently got me all that stuff and knew that at every deposition, the first question out of my mouth would be, have you checked your cell phone? How long would it take to do that?
And I'm sorry to continue with granular questions, but I think it's important for people to understand when you're getting the text messages at this point, are you getting PDFs of text messages? Are you getting screenshots? Are you getting things that contain data so that you get timestamps? What are you getting at this point?
In that case, we didn't have to go to those further levels because, most text messages will have timestamps built in. And in that case, the stuff we got just from that initial haul was so damning that, it was set point match at that point. I haven't had to ever go to the next level. I have had to go to that next level with my own clients, where I've had clients who've represented that things have happened and then that I've been skeptical of. And before they go and get slaughtered, I've gone and gotten their phones and taken them to forensic people and made sure that nothing was hanky about what they had in their, what they claimed was in their notes on their phone. But I haven't had to go that far. If one needs to, one will, I suppose. I just, when you read crime novels or criminal histories, everything is that, that little detail that you had to dig to find. Often the things that are really important in a case aren't buried that deeply, that you need to really go and get metadata and get really exotic. It's mostly just, going to be, okay, it's on your phone. Well, send me some PDFs of what your phone says, or even, okay, let's just read into the record. What's the timestamp that you want to read right now?
I think we all want to be Columbo or Elliot Ness's accountant member who gets Capone for tax evasion. And I think we're always thinking that one needs to dig even deeper for the smoking gun.
If the gun is smoking really well, you'll be able to smell it from far away. I mean, and maybe I'm overlooking some stuff, but generally I haven't had to go that far.
We've talked about discovery and about some of the work that you do to figure out whether there's a case, not a case. We haven't talked in detail about trial work. And while I made an allusion to this, our goal is to get the best negotiated outcome for our clients, because as much as we love trial, clients don't tend to benefit from the risk from that a lot of the times. But sometimes you have to try cases. If you were talking to a young lawyer about trial, what advice would you give them?
I think that what you want to do early in your career is lose. And find a place where you can lose. I mean, I think that any of us who've done this work seriously have run into attorneys who have never lost. And, having never lost, they come in with heroic senses of themselves that may not be in their client's interest. They may not be able to counsel their clients about losing. Every loss you have is a case where you had the courage to face long odds. It doesn't mean you would lose that case every time, but you were in a hard case and you still kept your cool, you still kept your head above water, and you still did the best job for your client. So, there's no, when I started as a DA, as a criminal prosecutor, you have a range of cases you can take. You can decide that you're just always going to win by only taking cases to trial that are, that are sure bang winners, because you have a lot as a criminal prosecutor that are just, this will win 99 times out of 100, win every single time. Those people aren't really pushing the envelope. They're not, when opposing counsel says to them, well, are you going to try it? They can't with credibility say, oh yeah, I'm going to try this case even though it's hard. And they themselves don't have the emotional fortitude to try a case that they might lose. If your winning record is 100%, you get really gun shy about losing. So it's hard to find an environment in which people will trust you to lose. But I think it's the most valuable thing you can do. One of the things the listeners don't know is that, I was your associate for, I don't know, I think we were just talking about whether it was 3 weeks or 3 months before I, thank you very much for the job, quit, and then went off and was a DA.
You had done a wonderful stint as a law clerk, though, to earn that slot.
And then to quit immediately. But, one of the reasons that I made that decision was that we were both at a very good firm with very big cases and very talented trial lawyers. And I looked around and I said, nobody's going to trust me to handle one of these cases for years and years and years. And I need to go to a place where people will trust me to learn. And, the DA's offices are great for that because they're not as invested in the wins or losses. And so you can go to a DA's office and lose, which is frankly what I did for my first 3 cases. I called them gas spring cases because the only thing that slowed down the not guilty verdict was the gas spring on the door at the deliberation room. You have to wait for the door to close for them all to look at each other and say, that guy's not guilty, and I would lose. And that is something I'm still proud of. I mean, I'm in a field, medical malpractice, where statistically we lose 90% of our cases. When a patient sues a doctor, you're going to lose 90% of the time.
When it goes to verdict.
When it goes to verdict. That's right. If you're not ready for that emotionally, if you haven't been through it and are able to counsel your client about it, you can't do the job. So, it's part of the skills that you need to build out is that humility to say, this thing is going against me, or these are long odds, but I'm going to give them hell anyway. I think the verdict that I'm proudest of was a case I should have lost. We had a case with a woman who had a very significant cardiac condition that the ER doctor missed, and she went home and treated what ailed her the way she'd always treated her pain, with a big line of methamphetamines. And it turns out that doing a lot of meth is not very good for your heart, and she died right there. To make matters worse, it's a wrongful death case. Her children had historically also used meth and had provided meth to their mother. This is not an appealing case. But the medical care was really bad. In our office, I have a saying, which is sinners are saints. It's the one place in the United States where whoever you are, a sinner or a saint, rich or poor, you should receive the best our society has to offer as an emergency room. And when I see people who walk into emergency rooms and don't get good care because, they're a meth head, or because they're crazy, or any of the things that make them easy to brush off, I get really angry, and we take those cases. And we don't make any money on them, but somebody has to take them because it's a very important principle. And this was a sinners or saints case. And I thought, generally our sinners or saints cases, we can settle out because we know the jury's not going to give us a lot of value on them. And on this one, they looked at us and they said, no jury is going to go for that case ever. And yet we got the verdict and we won that case. Now, would I have had the strength to walk into a case that I should have lost if I hadn't lost a bunch before? No, not at all. But, sometimes the case that you think you're going to lose, you win if you can keep your head cool and still do your job. And so I think that, as a young attorney, figure out how to lose. Figure out somebody who will trust you to take long odds on hard cases and for you to get your teeth punched in on them. Because that strength, getting pummeled that way, will make you a better attorney later, and it'll make you able to counsel your clients and talk with some credibility when that sense of, hey, we're going to be victors sets in and clouds their judgment.
Any suggestions for people, aside from the PD or the DA's office, for ways to approach that in terms of lower stakes, lower value cases that people won't take?
There's a great guy around here, Al Stoll, who used to have an advertisement that said, I will try your dogs. A trial is very time-consuming and emotionally draining for people. There's a lot of PI lawyers who have cases that are going to trial who say to themselves, this is a problem that this case is going to trial. Boy, I would really rather not do it. If you're ready to try junky cases, people will feed them to you. I mean, when I first started off, that's kind of what happened to me. And I think it's a great thing to do. So if you have it in you to be a solo at some point and be at the very bottom of this profession, you'll be able to have those opportunities and you can make them for yourself. It's harder when you're working for somebody else because, the person who's hiring you, employing you, wants you to make them money. They don't want you wasting your time and going and losing money.
But there's long game money and short game money. And that's why when you look around at some of the firms and the way they've structured their training programs, you know that they have high value cases. They don't need to take low value cases. And yet they sometimes take some of those more challenging liability cases, lower value cases, so that their associates can go off and try them.
And it's great if you're at a place where that's an opportunity for you. And welcome it. I remember the DA's office, there were young DAs who would shy away from those hard cases. My first, when I was a DA, I moved up the ranks very quickly. I tried 11 cases in my first year. Before my year anniversary was out, I was promoted up to serious and violent felonies. The only question after about a year and a half was I going to be the guy who got the next murder that happened in our county or not? And part of that was, even in the DA's office, taking junk, taking the cases other people were scared of. So if you can be in an environment where that's going to happen, a lot of people will say, this thing sucks. I don't want to be humiliated in front of a jury. I mean, many of us, our greatest fear in public speaking is being in a room full of people laughing at you. Well, if you've got a really bad case with a really bad client, that's what you're going to face. Can you continue to do a good job? Yes, you can. Is it going to be hard? Oh, it will. Will it hurt in ways that make you question yourself? Absolutely. That's the good part about it. And it'll make you a better lawyer in the end.
A note on Al Stoll. I think you brought up a great example of somebody who just kind of does things well across the boards. I remember riding back with him from San Mateo. We were in trial last year. He had just settled a $30 million case. Has no need to be in trial on a low-speed rear impact case that's going to get defensed. And yet he's willing to step in the ring and do it. And that's the hallmark of a true trial lawyer.
Everybody has to find themselves. There are people who will find that the pain of being in a hard case is too much. I'll say that, I had some very personal issues that were going on about a year ago, and the thing that put me in the best mood was I had a case where I'd actually moved to withdraw because I thought the case was going to lose. And the judge said, no, it's too close to trial. You got to try it. And we tried the hell out of that case. And it was just a wonderful experience. And I got the best compliment that I've gotten from a judge. It was not the trial judge was not the judge who had denied my withdrawal motion. He said, you tried a great case, and I'm kind of surprised that it didn't go your way. And I said, well, I moved to withdraw. I'm not surprised. I'm not the least bit surprised. I kind of expected this. And he said, well, it never showed. And I don't think it ever will. But, if you're in the business I'm in, you're in the long odds business, and you have to be comfortable with it.
To put a bow on that story, if I remember that case correctly, there was a lot of friction with the clients. And at the conclusion, even though they did not prevail on the case, and even though you moved to withdraw, they were very pleased with the effort that you put into trying the hell out of their case.
Yes. And I have not heard anything from the attorney that they actually hired for what they anticipated was going to be a follow-on malpractice action since the trial. So yes, it was a very acrimonious relationship, and we still did the best that anybody could have done for those clients, and I'm proud of it. And I'm proud of that loss.
Thank you very much for being here.
It's been a pleasant conversation, Miles.
Likewise, Nathaniel. And thank you for listening today. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions on ways in which you have approached medical malpractice cases. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.